UFC Vegas 70 betting and DraftKings show. We have 13 fights this Saturday afternoon. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. And we'll get things started in the bantamweight division as Garrett Armfield comes in as a small favorite at -145. The comeback on Jose Johnson is +125. And Jose Johnson fought on Contender Series this past season. That's going to be a theme throughout the show for this card. If you've been paying attention the last couple weeks, we have a slew of Dana White's Contender Series fighters up and down these cards, including this Saturday. Jose Johnson being one of them. Got to win on Contender Series, but I'm honestly not super impressed with him. I think he has solid striking. You know, he has a very lengthy amateur career, powerful kicks on the feet. His grappling seems to be okay, and he comes from like a high school wrestling background as well. He's athletic, but when you watch these grappling exchanges, he's very poor in terms of his position, gets reversed a lot, falls out of dominant positions as well. Now, he can throw submissions up off his back. He's crafty with his submission attempts, but he can be out-grappled by those with a decent ground game, as evidenced by his 3 submission losses on his record. Now, Garrett Armfield made his short notice UFC debut up a weight class against David Onama, and obviously it was a tough spot coming in there up a weight class. Gave a decent account of himself, I thought, all things considered. Now dropping down to his natural weight class, I think we see a much better version of Armfield, who also has a little bit of a wrestling background as well. I'd expect him to be the one with more wrestling upside, more control upside in those grappling exchanges. And then on the feet, he's not nearly as technical as Johnson, but he is going to swing with power. He's very wild on the feet, but he swings with everything that he has. I think this is a fight that you do want exposure to on DraftKings. You know, Armfield at 8,500, Jose Johnson at 7,700, I think is going to be a somewhat popular underdog because of the line movement this week. But I do think this is one that just correlates well to DraftKings scoring, because I mentioned both guys very sloppy, very green in terms of the grappling. They get reversed a ton. They put themselves in submissions. I just think this one has a high likelihood to finish, but also rack up points along the way. So we're going Armfield by TKO. That's the official pick, but I'm going to have exposure to both sides on DraftKings. And up next, we head to the women's bantamweight division as Haley Cohen comes in as a -140 favorite. The comeback on Eileen Perez is +120. And this is a fight where we have another Dana White Contender Series fighter in Haley Cohen, who fought on this past season. Eileen Perez obviously made her UFC debut against Stephanie Egger. She was mostly well known for calling out Amanda Nunes, saying she's coming for the belt, blah, 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 and proceeded to get finished in the second round by Stephanie Egger. So not a great look there. To her credit, though, she does look like she's in much better shape coming into this fight, and she's certainly going to need it because Haley Cohen is very physically strong. She's an All-American gymnast in college, so you know the physicality and the athleticism is there with her. Now, her biggest issue is that she gets very careless in grappling exchanges. She puts herself in bad spots. She's been submitted twice in her career. She was almost submitted in that Contender Series fight as well. But in general, she's a decent scrambler. She's okay on the feet. I expect her kicks to be the difference on the feet. But I do expect these girls to grapple quite a bit here. So the path to victory for Perez is obvious. You know, take Cohen down, try to consolidate position or submit her. And then on the flip side, Cohen should likely keep the fight standing, but her ground game's not terrible offensively. It's just the defense and the way she gets out of these scrambles is where you have to be concerned against somebody who is kind of a grappler like Eileen Perez. But I'm going to lean with Cohen here. I just think the physicality and the cardio, those intangibles are going to swing me in her favor. We're going to go Cohen by decision. That's the official pick. In terms of DraftKings, though, I don't think this is going to be a popular fight to target for good reason, because I just don't really see much of a ceiling on either side. Which brings us to our next fight as Nurulo Alayev comes in as a -180 favorite. The comeback on Rafael Alves is +155. And if I don't have 100% of this fight on DraftKings this weekend, it's going to be very close to it, because I definitely like the way that this fight sets up in terms of DraftKings scoring. On one hand, you have Alayev, who's an 8-0 undefeated prospect fighting out of Tajikistan. He's another former Dana White Contender Series fighter off this past season. In my opinion, he was one of the best prospects to come off this past season because of his grappling. He has that typical Russian style grappling where he's very smothering on top, not super known for being a finisher, although he did get a finish on that Contender Series fight. But most of his regional fights, he just dominated his opponents with his grappling, controlled them in those exchanges, and got his hand raised in a decision. Now, on the flip side, Rafael Alves, what he does have is he's very explosive early, and he has clear finishing potential early in fights. Now, what he doesn't have is cardio, and that's evidenced by the fact that he's been finished in 10 of his 11 professional losses, and you see it in just about every one of his fights, where he's very explosive early, very powerful on the feet. He's got a very nice guillotine choke, one of his better weapons, but outside of those first 5 minutes, if you're able to stay safe there, then he typically starts to fade and wilt, and you can get this guy out of here. So this was actually one of my first bets this week. I bet the under 2.5 at plus 115. I really think we see a finish here. We're going Alaev by submission. That's the official pick. But again, in terms of DraftKings, I really think this is a fight that you want to key in on this week. Next fight up, Joe Solecki comes in as a minus 520 favorite, second biggest betting favorite on the card. The comeback on UFC newcomer Carl Deaton III is plus 410. And this is one I'm not going to spend a ton of time on. You know, it's very clear Joe Solecki needed a short notice replacement. They called up this dude, Carl Deaton, who is basically a regional grinder. He does train out of American Top Team, but in terms of his skill level, I'm just not quite sure he belongs on the UFC roster. He does have a little bit of power on the feet. He seems to be like a tough, durable guy, but most of his wins have actually come by submission, and I don't think he's really faced anyone, at least in terms of the grappling, to the level of Joe Solecki here. So I think it's pretty clear Solecki's going to get this fight to the ground, and that's where I think he's just levels better than Carl Deaton, and I think he makes that clear here and gets the submission. So Joe Solecki by submission, that's the official pick. Next fight up, Charles Johnson comes in as a minus 170 favorite. The comeback on Oday Osborne is plus 145. And Charles Johnson is a guy who I honestly didn't buy into as much of the hype as others seem to have when he made his way over to the UFC. I wasn't super impressed with him. Really, even on the regional scene, he looked to be like a decent prospect, but not like a future champ or anybody that's really going to make real noise in this division. And he kind of proved that over his first couple fights. Didn't look great. Got the split over Zalgas. I thought he lost that fight. And then rebounds with a first-round knockout over Jimmy Flick. But let's be honest, my guy, Jimmy Flick, not super durable. So I'm not going to put too much stock into that. At the end of the day, I think Charles Johnson is a very good athlete. I think he's got a well-rounded skill set, but I don't think he's this type of like elite guy that should be a big favorite against a lot of guys in this division. Now on the flip side, Oday Osborne, I think that's why we've seen kind of a decent amount of line movement in Osborne's favor, is because Osborne is a good athlete himself. He's explosive on the feet. You know, that's one of his best weapons, is he can just land a big bomb on you early, flying knee, whatever, jump on a guillotine. He's very explosive and opportunistic early. A lot of fights have ended inside the first round for him, but you see his limitations when fights get extended outside of that first round. He's another guy you have to worry about the cardio, because he does fade as the fight goes on, and that's a problem, especially for a guy like him who's generally more of a counter striker. He's not going to put a ton of volume out there. If he's fading and doesn't have as much power on those strikes, and he's putting even less volume out there, I really can't bank on him to win rounds here. I think he's finish reliant, and he's going up against a durable guy like Charles Johnson. And I think the biggest takeaway for me in this matchup is the cardio edge in favor of Charles Johnson, because he has great cardio. I expect him to take over late as this fight goes on. So give me Charles Johnson by TKO. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Victor Martinez, a slight favorite at minus 115, with Jordan Levitt on the comeback at minus 105. And this is another bet for me. I bet Jordan Levitt at plus 105 this week, and I don't think it's going to be a popular opinion, but I do think this is actually a good stylistic matchup for him. You know, he's coming off the loss against Paddy Pimblett. That was always going to be a tough matchup for him, and we know at this point how he needs to win fights. He needs to get the fight to the ground. His wrestling's pretty solid. He's got good jiu-jitsu as well. He's opportunistic with the submission. 6 of his 10 wins have come by submission, and now he's facing a guy in Victor Martinez who's going to have a clear striking advantage. You know, most people have a striking advantage over a guy like Jordan Levitt, who basically has nothing on the feet. He's waiting until he can get it to the ground. Now, Victor Martinez, he has some power in his hands. I think he has Definitely some knockout upside if he can keep this fight standing, but I don't really trust him to be able to do that. And when you watch Martinez, he's a guy who fought 2 seasons ago on Contender Series. Every time he gets taken down, he gives his backup. He gave his backup in that fight. He's done it multiple times on the regional scene as well. He's just so focused on working back to his feet as quickly as possible that he automatically gives up his back every single time. And I think if you do that against a guy like Jordan Levitt, I think you're probably getting submitted here. So give me Levitt by submission. Next up, the first of 2 women's flyweight bouts. We have Gabriela Fernandez, a -125 favorite over Jasmine Jasudavicius at +105. And Gabriela Fernandez is making her UFC debut here. She previously fought over in LFA. She's had a very decent regional in terms of the fighters that she's faced. You know, a lot of these fighters, we say, well, they face complete bumps on the regional scene. Her only professional loss came against Maria Silva, who fought on Contender Series last season. But she fights out of the southpaw stance. She seems to be pretty athletic, pretty powerful. 5 of her 8 wins have come inside the distance. She's going up against Jasmine Jasudavicius here, who we know basically needs to get this fight to the ground. You know, on the feet, her striking is not good. She's very hittable, super low volume. That's my biggest complaint with her is there's just not a lot of activity. She's not putting a lot of strikes out there. She's not doing a ton unless she can get the fight to the ground. Now, we saw her limitations in that Natalia Silva fight when she was unable to land those takedowns. She had no backup plan, you know, and Silva seems to be like a good prospect, so I don't want to weigh that too heavily, but we've seen her at times in the past as well struggle with fighters that are just more athletic and stronger than her in the clinch, and I think that could be a potential scenario here with Fernandez, who seems to be very athletic, very powerful, and if she can win those clinch battles and pummels it up against the fence and whatnot, just with her overall strength and athleticism, I don't think Jasmine is going to have a backup plan here. So I think Fernandez has a striking advantage. I think Fernandez is probably just going to take over as the fight goes on, assuming she can keep the fight on the feet, because that's the one weakness is when she is taken down, she tends to get stuck on her back quite a bit. So there is a world where Jasmine lands a couple takedowns here and gets her hand raised, but I can't get there this weekend. I'm going with the UFC newcomer and Fernandez to get her hand raised. Fernandez by decision. That's the official pick. I'm not loving this fight for DraftKings. It's going to be mostly a stay away for me. Which brings us to our feature bout on the prelims as Trevor Peek comes in as a -190 favorite with Eric Gonzalez on the comeback at +160. And I think this one is going to be fun because I'm expecting both fighters to stand and bang until somebody drops. And that's typically how Trevor Peek fights in all of his fights. So I'm not really rushing to the window to back him as near a -200 favorite because I do think this dude has clear holes in his game. For starters, his cardio and his defensive grappling are basically entirely unproven. I don't think he's a good grappler. I don't think he has good cardio, but he does have obvious power, and he seems to be like a durable fighter as well. We saw that on the Contender Series in his last fight where he basically walked through hell in that first round and ended up taking over, getting the knockout finish here. Now, Eric Gonzalez, I just don't think this guy's any good. You know, they brought him in, he fought Jim Miller, got finished by Jim Miller on the feet, and then he goes up against Terrence McKinney and gets subbed immediately in the first round. He's been subbed multiple times in his career. He can't grapple at all. What he does have, like Peek, is a little bit of power. So I'm expecting these guys to stand and trade until somebody drops, and I just trust Peek's durability a little bit more, and I think he's just a little bit more powerful as well. So the pick is going to be Peek by knockout, but in terms of DraftKings, I don't think Gonzalez is going to be owned really at all, and I'm probably going to look to be overweight to the field just because of the way these guys are matching up. It's going to be a high variance fight. It would not be crazy if Gonzalez was the one to land the big knockout shot here. So just keep that in mind. The pick is going to be Peek, but I wouldn't be as confident as the market seems to be in this -200 range. Kicking off the main card, Mike Millett comes in as a -215 favorite with Johan Liness on the comeback at +185. And this is a matchup that I do not expect to see it hit the judges' scorecards. On one hand, we have Mike Millett, who's only fought outside of the first round once in his entire career. He is typically a very fast starter. On the feet, he does have power, but his best skill set is his submission grappling. He holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he's very slick with those submission attempts. On the flip side, Johan Lainez is a very easy fighter to break down because typically he needs to land a big shot early in order to win. And I know that might sound funny because we just saw him get a decision victory over Darian Weeks, but that was extremely low volume, and it speaks more to the lack of Weeks' willingness to really put much out there. And a lot of people thought he even won that fight still, so it was kind of a sketchy decision. Either way, Johan Lainez is not a guy that I think you can bank on to convincingly win rounds. And in terms of the cardio, I think his cardio is terrible. He fades after the first round. That last fight was very low output, not a ton of activity, and he's still gassed out in that fight. I just think he's early knockout or bust, whereas Mike Millett is probably just as likely to land a big shot on the feet and has all the grappling upside as well. Now, he's not a bulletproof because he doesn't really play defense himself, and we have seen him clipped and hurt multiple times now across his career. So he's not like any type of lock per se, but I do think I'm much more willing to ride with him even as a favorite here over Johan Lainez, who I just don't really think is all that good. I think he has to land a bomb early, and I'm willing to fade that with Mike Millett. So Mike Millett by submission is the official pick, and this is one that I think you're going to want exposure to both sides on DraftKings. Next up, we have the biggest betting favorite on the card as Tatiana Suarez makes her return to the UFC octagon after nearly a 4-year layoff. And for those that don't know, Tatiana Suarez, when healthy, is probably the best female fighter on the entire UFC roster. I do expect her to eventually get a title shot here and probably capture UFC gold, assuming she can stay healthy, and that's the big thing here. But in terms of this matchup, I think Montana De La Rosa, while she's been super durable throughout the UFC, we've seen time and time again, you can take her down, you can control her, and going up against the best wrestler across any female weight class in Tatiana Suarez, who averages over 6.5 takedowns per 15 minutes, that's the best number across any division. I expect her to land multiple takedowns here. She can control De La Rosa on the mat. Whether she finishes or not, that's another conversation. I'm not quite sure after all this ring rust if she's going to be super aggressive and hunting the finish, but I do expect her to score well on DraftKings because even in a decision victory, it's going to come with multiple takedowns and tons of control times. Basically, the only way that De La Rosa can win this fight is some sort of submission off her back, and I think that's a very low probability outcome here against somebody like Suarez. So we're going Suarez by decision. That's the official pick, and she's an obvious target on DraftKings. That's likely going to be one of the most popular fighters on the slate. Next fight up, we have the only heavyweight matchup on the card as Augusto Sakai comes in as a -135 favorite with Dantel Mays on the comeback at +115. And this is one where we have Sakai, who was 4-0 to start his UFC run and has since lost his last 4 fights. Not only lost, but was knocked out in all 4 of those losses, which is not a great look because a guy who we all saw as being a very durable fighter, solid cardio for the division, high volume striker, can keep that pace over 15 minutes. Now we have to question his durability, and he's never been good at defending takedowns, defends at just 54%. So there's multiple red flags here on the Sakai side. Now, to his credit, the guys that he's been losing to are some of the best in the division. You can't really fault him there. On the flip side, Dantel Mays, this is going to be a step down for Sakai facing Dantel Mays. And Dantel Mays has proven that I don't think you can trust this guy after the stunt he pulled. I think he fought a bad game plan there. I think there's a clear path to victory for him in this fight against Sakai. He needs to implement the wrestling. I don't know if I trust him to do that. And on the feet, I don't think he's going to be able to keep pace with Sakai over 15 minutes. I don't think he's going to be able to match the volume of Sakai. So I think he either has to test the durability and land something heavy or land multiple takedowns, and I'm just not sure I trust him to do that. I think Sakai has better cardio, better volume over 15 minutes, so we're going Sakai by decision, but this is one where I think it has a really wide range of outcomes, especially when it comes to DraftKings scoring, because it basically just matters if Mays comes in with the right game plan. So it's one that I don't think you can fully fade on DraftKings, and I wouldn't want to fully fade it, but I also wouldn't want to be like super overweight to this fight and then have it just be a typical heavyweight slop fest that ends up busting on DraftKings. Next fight up, we have Andre Muniz, a minus 205 favorite with the comeback on Brendan Allen at plus 175. And this is another bet for me. I backed Brendan Allen at plus 185. And if this line keeps getting out of control here, I'm probably going to end up adding a little bit more on Brendan Allen. And it's not because I think he should be the favorite, but I do think he's going to put up a very competitive fight against Andre Muniz, who's been surging in the UFC. He's 5-0 in the UFC. He's currently on a 9-fight win streak. Most of his wins have come by submission. He's a very slick submission grappler, one of the more dangerous submission grapplers on the UFC roster. And his wrestling seems to be pretty solid. He averages over 3.5 takedowns per 15 minutes. I think he could potentially land a takedown or two here, threaten with submissions against Brendan Allen. But on the feet, I think this is Allen all day. I think Allen's a better striker. I think Allen's clearly going to be putting more volume out there. And I trust Brendan Allen's durability more than I do Andre Muniz as well. Muniz historically has always had issues with cardio and durability. He's been knocked out 4 times in his career, and those were times where he wasn't able to have that grappling success. And Brendan Allen's a good grappler in his own right. 11 of his 20 wins have come by submission. He's on a 3-fight win streak. 2 of those were by sub as well. He's a very capable scrambler. If he could just give fits to Muniz on the mat and just stay safe and not get submitted in the first round, I think he's going to be super live here to take over late and potentially even get a finish of his own. So give me Brendan Allen here. Allen by decision is going to be my official pick here, and I like him as an underdog. Like I said, I bet him as an underdog, and I plan to be not a full fade on Muniz, but definitely overweight on DraftKings on the Allen side as well. Which brings us to our main event of the week, as Nikita Krylov is a minus 170 favorite. Ryan Spann on the comeback at plus 145. And this is one where I seem to always get Ryan Spann fights wrong for the most part. What he does have is clear finishing ability, and I've seemed to maybe underrate his power and his grappling at times in the past. I'm not underrating it anymore. This guy is very powerful, can hurt you early, and he's pretty slick with his submission attempts as well, so you can never count him out there. Now, where he does still have some glaring holes is his durability, because he's been knocked out multiple times in his career. He's been hurt and wobbled in just about every one of his fights. Now, his last 5 fights have all ended inside the first round, so I don't expect this one to last long either. Now, on the Krylov side, I just think he's much better fighter pretty much in every area. You know, he's a very skilled striker, solid cardio, pretty durable on the feet. Now, where he has issues is he loves to grapple. He averages over 2 takedowns per 15 minutes, and that's fine if you're going to stay safe, but he is notorious for putting himself in bad spots on the mat. He's been submitted a handful of times across his career, so you got to watch out for that against a guy like Ryan Spann here. But outside of Spann being able to catch Krylov early, I think this is Krylov all day. I think he takes over and gets a finish of his own. It's Krylov by TKO. That's the official pick, and this is a main event that I think you clearly want exposure to. It's going to be popular, but I don't really see a world where this gets out of like the first 2 rounds here. So Krylov by TKO, that's the official pick. And as always, fightnumbers.com is going to have my DraftKings player rankings broken down by salary tier. It's going to have my ownership projections as well, which were very good last week. I just want to shout myself out. That was the best ownership projections I've ever had in terms of accuracy last week. So yeah, shout out to me for that. Check it out this week. It's all completely free. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.